Welcome to the Be Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Greetings this week from New Jersey. I know, I get around. I'm on the East Coast spending time with family and friends right now, but while I'm here, I was able to take some time out to record a few conversations in New York City, and that is with some really interesting women, and you're going to hear from them in upcoming episodes. Today's conversation was recorded while I was in Santa Fe recently, and it's with Roshi Joan Halifax. Now, you might know of Roshi from her work in the Buddhist community. I have certainly been aware of her for many, many years. She's a Zen Buddhist teacher at the Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, but she's also an anthropologist. She's an ecologist, a civil rights activist, a hospice caregiver, and an author. Her most recent book is Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet. Roshi practices what's called socially engaged Buddhism. Now, she is very involved with protecting the rights of others and empowering people, and that is really so much of what her message is. What she's come to realize is that in this work, specifically, people living a virtuous life, those who are helping others specifically, that this can lead to a shadow side. And what she means is that by even doing good work, we can go too far, ultimately harming either ourselves or the person or the people that we're trying to help. Now, in this conversation, she explains exactly what she means by that. But in short, she encourages us to find balance. And this is exactly what her new book entails, how to find that balance, how we can see the big picture, how we can have compassion, but still stay in balance and, of healthy mind and body. It seems to me her book couldn't have come out at a better time, a time when so many of us are experiencing outrage and despair over what's going on in the world. But we still want to be helpful, right? We still want to make things better. As you'll hear, I personally found some wisdom and comfort in her words and suggestions for how to deal with our current situation. Roshi and I met through a mutual friend. Her name is Angel Murdoch, and you'll hear Roshi refer to Angel in the episode. And you can go back and listen to my conversation with Angel on episode 38, and that'll give you a bit of background on her work. Before you listen to our conversation, just a quick reminder that if you're new to the podcast, I encourage you to go back to previous episodes where I highlight other interesting and truly courageous women doing extraordinary things. When you listen to those previous episodes, you'll discover strong women who have overcome adversity. They've started businesses. They've challenged themselves in a variety of ways. They've traveled the world, attained status as world-class athletes, and given up secure jobs to pursue their dreams and passions. You can find all the episodes at BeBoldPodcast.com, or you can subscribe wherever you find your favorite podcasts. With that, please enjoy this conversation with Roshi Joan Halifax. The first question that I'm interested in is how to appropriately refer to you. You're Roshi Joan Halifax.
Yeah, you can just call me Roshi.
Roshi, okay, good. And tell me what Roshi means, and for the listeners too.
Well, it means venerable teacher, but I always say venerable is more like decrepit.
I don't believe that for a moment. But thank you for the clarification, at least, and thanks for allowing me up here to your beautiful Upaya Center. It's just a gorgeous place up in it's not quite the mountains of New Mexico, but just outside of Santa Fe, very close to Santa Fe. Someone could literally walk up here if they wanted to, if it wasn't 90 degrees out.
Right.
They could do that. So first, I like to start with my guests just to find out a little bit about you. If you could tell me what it is that you do as a Roshi here at the center.
Well, I'm the abbot of Upaya Zen Center. So it's a Buddhist center. It's has a residential community. It has a very robust program that brings teachers from all over the world into this extraordinary city where I live, which is Santa Fe. And they're teachers who are bringing together contemplative practice with social engagement. So I think my work, probably I'm best known for, is what's termed socially engaged Buddhism.
Tell me a little bit more about that exactly, because I love the pairing of that, the Buddhism, but it's not Buddhism in a cave. It's Buddhism in the real world. Is that right?
Well, actually, some of my students have lived in caves and have practiced, done long-term meditation retreats. But socially engaged Buddhism is a Buddhism where we're addressing two aspects of social engagement. One is social service. So many of our people work with dying people. They work in hospitals or prisons, or they work in humanitarian organizations. For example, I think you've interviewed Angel Murdoch, who's this amazing nurse, midwife, who's been part of our Nomads Clinic and is going back again with our community to Dolpo this year to run clinics in very remote areas of the Himalayas. And the basis of that work is really deep Buddhist base. That is this vision of that, we bring our sense of practice, but also our expertise as clinicians into communities where there's no medical care. So that's another part of our work. We work also with people who are homeless, and also with people who are grieving. So that's all in the area of service. Then another aspect of social engagement has to do with social action. And social action is actually addressing issues related to structural violence. That is discrimination and harm against communities. For example, we could say discrimination against women. That would be something related to, for example, sexual harassment or unequal pay basis or discrimination against women of color, where just in New Mexico, it looks like our first Congress person of Native American origin is coming out of New Mexico, or discrimination against people with sexual preferences that are unusual, not considered to be the norm. And of course, in our very fluid sexual and gender world today, those identities that are sexually based or gender based often experience discrimination against those people who carry those identities, discrimination against them, or in relation to poverty, economic aspects where people who have less access to income, for example, don't receive the same kind of medical care as the wealthy.
So when someone comes to the center here, and do you have centers around the United States? Or
actually, we have small communities all over the world, not just around the United States, but we have, I have students all over the world. In fact, my 8th book just came out. It's called Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet. And it's being published not only in mainland China, but also in Taiwan. So the first 2 foreign rights were actually sold to these 2 very important Chinese communities.
And that's because you have a strong base there?
It's because I have students all over the world. Yeah. Actually, I've just learned about the book being sold in China to both Taiwan and mainland China.
Oh, that's exciting.
And it was great because a nurse midwife contacted me and said she's Western, but she works in China. I'm so glad it's coming out in Chinese. I have 1,000 midwives in China who need to read this book.
No kidding. That's great.
Yeah, it's just wonderful.
Yeah. So in terms of, because I'm interested in digging into this just a little bit. So you've got centers around the world and you've got...
Well, I don't say centers, not like this.
Communities.
Yeah. I have students around the world, and these students serve in all different kinds of ways.
Do they mainly come here for teaching with you, directly from you?
But I also travel all over the world. I have a very active community, both of clinicians and also I've trained executives in Japan, in Tokyo. So I have a very active teaching team in Japan that works with me in Europe and in other parts of the world.
Okay. So back to the book then. Tell me more about the book and explain to how relevant that is to what's happening in our society today.
I wrote this book really because I've spent the past 50 years working with people in the healthcare profession, in corrections, humanitarians, people in business and education, people who want to genuinely serve others and who encounter in the process of their deep aspiration to be of service, to alleviate the suffering of others, they've encountered a lot of suffering themselves. So the book explores what I've termed edge states. They're virtues that are really important in terms of the personal well-being and our social well-being, but also they have a shadow side. So I do a very deep exploration of altruism. I mean, a world without altruism doesn't exist. I mean, you and I wouldn't be alive save for altruism. Our parents manifested some kind of altruism.
But you're saying there's a dark side to that.
But I'm saying that there is a shadow side to that. And it's called in social psychology pathological altruism. And it's when we actually harm ourselves or harm the people that we're endeavoring to serve or harm the institution that we're based in.
In what way? What kind of harm are you talking about?
I'll give you a very simple example. Let's just take the example of a nurse, or let's take it of a family caregiver, and a family caregiver who's taking care of a dying mother. And let's call her Jane. And let's say Jane hasn't had a full night's sleep in 3 months.
So not harm in terms of intentional harm, but not taking care of themselves.
Or maybe harming the patient. Maybe we, for example, or we even harm a nation. For example, what happened in Haiti after the earthquake in Haiti, where the United Nations went in and ended up bringing cholera into Haiti and causing a great deal of harm for Haitians, or where contractors were brought in from the United States but didn't use the resources, the people resources in Haiti, which would have been very empowering for Haitians. That's pathological altruism. And that's exactly what we try to avoid in our work in Nepal. Our work in Nepal, as Angel probably has shared with you, is really about the empowerment of Nepalese people. Whether it's Sering Wangmo, who's this really remarkable nurse, midwife, who has worked closely and will be working closely with Angel, helping to support her education, and also ending up this year inviting her to be a co-director of the Nomads Clinic. Or of Dr. Sodam, whom I've known since he was 13, who's head of the Himalayan region of Dhulikhel Hospital, and supporting his medical education and really giving him a platform for his work. Pema Gyalpo, Tora Akita, all these wonderful Nepalis, where instead of a bunch of Western clinicians going in and dominating the scene, they're working collaboratively with Nepalis and providing a kind of platform for Nepalis to excel in.
So are you saying that the edge is being somewhere on the line of doing good but not falling off the cliff and pushing your agenda too much or harming others or yourself?
That's part of the edge, Beth. But the other part is that to be on the high edge of any of these virtues allows you to see a much bigger landscape, a landscape that includes both the power of the virtue but also the danger of the virtue. And being able to take in the whole landscape, if you will, and not just sitting, in the bubble of the virtue, but to understand that it's very easy to go over the edge. And one has to cultivate strong balance and groundedness in order to maintain purchase, if you will, a good perch on the edge. And all of us fall over the edge. All of us experience not only tipping over in our experience of our endeavor to be of service to others, but we also fall over, for example, in our experience of empathy, where we're in resonance, physical or affective, emotional or cognitive resonance with another. And this is called empathy. But if we're too empathic or too identified with another, we can become empathically over-aroused, empathically distressed, and become sick as a result of being in too great a resonance with others. And I go through a number of other edge states in the course of the book, a deep plunge into looking at altruism, empathy, integrity, respect, and engagement. And for altruism, it's pathological altruism is the shadow. For empathy, it's empathic distress is the shadow. Integrity, it's moral suffering that's the shadow. Respect, disrespect is the shadow.
Do you think that we're all suffering from one of these?
Well, I think, we sort of waver around. I don't know if we're all suffering from one of these. How could I ever know that?
Well, I don't know. I guess what I'm thinking is, how broad is this? Is this something that you're seeing a lot of in the world, or is it pretty narrow?
No, I think many people, if talk with teachers today.
Good point. And nurses, as you said before.
And nurses, teachers, educators, talk with any parent. Talking about this issue of being a parent today, where kids are so vulnerable, where there's school shootings that are causing such stress and fear in the lives of children, that stress and fear, of course, it resonates right into the family system. And one feels morally compromised because we live in a system where our kids are often not safe.
Is this a timely book, or could you have written this book 35 years ago and we would have needed it as much as we do today?
I think this book has been needed for a long time. In fact, it is timely because I think we're more visibly vulnerable than we have been. But I'm 75 years old. So I know what was happening in the 50s and 60s. And I'm very sensitive to the fact that I have this sense of gratitude of having lived so long, of being very healthy, being very productive in the course of my life, of having a strong meditation practice. So living in this time, I feel I have more resources than I had 50 years ago, in fact, including, just the resource of experience.
And the ability to reach a bigger audience, too, with your messaging.
Well, if you're around long enough, you end up being touched by a lot of people and
touching a lot of people, too.
Uh-huh. But the book is filled with voices, not only my own voice. I've sat at the bedside with so many dying people and also worked as a volunteer in the penitentiary of New Mexico and worked in the humanitarian world. And I've had a broad and deep life experience. And as a result of that, I feel the kind of blessing of experience. I survived my life. Oh, good.
Mm-hmm. I want to say one thing, and then I want to go back in time a little bit. You don't look a day over, I don't know,
that's
58 or 60 or something. I want to let listeners know that you have kept a lot of youth that I would never have guessed you were 75. So I'll just say that. But what I'd like to do, because you do bring so much experience and so many years to the table, how did that all start? So back in was it late 60s, early 70s? Is that when you started studying Zen Buddhism?
Well, I think it really started when I was a child. I was very sick between the ages 4 and 6, and I was taken care of by this remarkable Afro-American woman whose mother had been a slave. And she just infused in me the sense of both resilience and also kind of a gratefulness. And she also made a deep impression on me because knowing what her background was and how unconditionally caring she was for me, it was very inspiring, as I got out of this sickness. And she was our family maid up until she died, but she was really a force of good and inspiration in our family. Now, I discovered in that 2 years of being bedridden that I couldn't see.
So you were ill at between 4 and 6,
That's
you
right.
said, bedridden.
Yeah.
And blind.
Exactly. And as a result of that, I discovered I had imagination, I had an inner life, and I also never was properly socialized, which probably not a bad thing.
It's probably a very good thing.
Yeah. But anyway, she infused my life with a sense of integrity. And as a result of that, not that I'm a perfect person, far from it, I make mistakes all the time. One of the things about the book that I think is important is that we don't reject our mistakes, we learn from them. In fact, learning from them, we build character. And I've had to apologize thousands of times in my life because I have lived an experimental life. My parents expected me to get married and have kids. Nothing wrong with being married and having kids, but I just took a road less traveled.
Mm-hmm. So back at age 6, you came out of this illness?
Well, it took, years.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyway, I was always, what could I say? I was littler and sort of less developed than my age mates. And, that was in a way a gift because I kind of pushed myself to excel and to experiment and to look at life as a gift. For me, it was like I felt so grateful that eventually I got healthy, and I wasn't really very healthy until my late 30s.
So a child of the 60s, shall we say?
Well, I wasn't a child. I was in my 20s, so.
Okay, so a child of the 50s, but in the 60s you found Zen Buddhism?
Yeah, I was very fortunate as part of the civil rights and the anti-war movement, and I was very fortunate to meet Thich Nhat Hanh in the mid-60s, and I had a contemplative practice and I was socially engaged and a revolutionary. But, I also realized that I too was suffering and I didn't see the connection between meditation and social action. But here was somebody who embodied that aspect. And so, I was like, oh, we don't have to separate these worlds. They're actually interconnected and they can feed each other. So I became, a socially engaged Buddhist at a very young age. But not like I am today. I'm much more embedded in that view.
Was he the biggest influence at that time because of the Vietnam War, would you say?
Yeah, I think so. I think Martin Luther King thought he was an extraordinary person. He was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Thich Nhat Hanh
was. And he was young. I mean, so he's 89 now. I'm 75, so he's 14 years older than me. So, he was older than me, but we were both young. He was in his mid-30s around that time and I was at Columbia University working in the Bureau of Applied Social Research. Buddhism was practical. It wasn't about a romantic religious experience. It was more that it was a very practical, made sense to me. I realized I could train my mind. I could change my mind in a positive way. And it was a path that, I looked into many other things. I was an anthropologist when I was young.
Is that what you studied in school?
Yeah, I studied anthropology. So I was very interested in, other cultures. And I was also raised as a Christian, was sent to Christian schools when I was in high school. But Buddhism just was very practical and made sense. So I, eventually took precepts, and then I never thought I would end up in my current situation. But
if you were brought up in Christian schools, what did your family think back at that time?
I think my family was pretty disturbed by my life.
Did they express it?
Oh, sure. And, they were good Southern people. So
where did you grow up?
I grew up. My father's family was from South Carolina and Savannah. And my mother's family was from New Jersey, but that doesn't mean that she had ideas that were very liberal.
No, I'm from New Jersey, so I know that.
You know that. And I was raised in Southern Florida, North Carolina, and I went to school in Virginia and New Orleans. So, it's the whole Southern thing. It's great. I love the South.
This is the Be Bold podcast. So this is why I'm kind of going down this path that had to be a bold move at the time to go against not only your family, but community, I'm sure, and into this world that people didn't understand quite as they do today.
Well, I'm not sure everybody understands it today. I don't even know if I do.
Well, at least today I can say that I am a meditator and people don't look at me like I'm a unicorn.
Right.
They say, oh, okay, yeah, that's something that she does. So at least today there's a lot more understanding around it and acceptance, I think. But back then.
Well, back then, I think the 60s, it was a time of great social and cultural upheaval. And there was a big culture shift in the 60s that was global, in fact. And we're still in the resonance of it. I'm happy to say that it, hasn't totally lost momentum. And in fact, I look at what's happening today in terms of social engagement, seeing some of these kids coming out of high school, around gun violence and really taking power into their hands. And I'm thinking, hey, I'm looking at a particular young woman and I'm thinking, I bet I know what she's going to be like when she's 75. Right on. But it's not easy to have that kind of role because you're sort of a pioneer. People have all these positive and negative projections that they lay on you. And, you don't identify with them, but it's okay. I'm fine. But I have certain principles that I live by, and I live by them in a very dedicated and fierce way.
And you think that started way back when?
I think it really, my family was a good family. They were.
Oh, not taking anything away from them at all.
No. They were good people. And also this woman who was so extraordinary in my childhood. I think it matters who you're brought up by and with.
So you learned that strength early on.
Yeah.
And especially, like you said, with having this illness, you had this great imagination going as well. So
it was great.
Wonderful. Was this during the time of Sharon Salzberg, or were you kind of ahead of their time, Jack Kornfield? And
I'm a little bit older than them, but I went to visit them in the early 1970s when they just gotten back from Burma. And they were starting the Insight Meditation Society. It's Joseph Goldstein, Sharon, and Jack. Wonderful. And we all became really good friends. I was a little bit older, not much. So.
Well, but it must have been nice, even though you were a little bit older than they are. It must have been nice to have that community to kind of look toward.
That community was much more engaged with introducing insight meditation into Western culture, and they did a fantastic job. They continue to do that. At that time, they were not so socially engaged. I think later, Jack and Sharon most particularly became more involved with socially engaged Buddhism. Jack became a psychologist. Sharon is she's one of my closest friends. And she has worked with women who work in domestic violence shelters and so on. So she's very sensitive to issues related to structural violence.
How does Zen Buddhism differ from insight meditation and the society there?
So there are three main schools of Buddhism. The oldest school is called Theravadan, and it's the Theravada school. And that much more relies on the Pali Canon. Later, around the time of Christ, the Mahayana school arose, and just very simply, that is much more related to compassion and compassion orientations. And Zen is in that particular school. The third school is Vajrayana, which is Tibetan Buddhism, and that emerged around the 6th century.
Okay, and Pali, P-A-L-I, not Polly, P-O-L-L-Y.
That's right. Exactly.
Just for people who are new with that word, yeah. And that's a Hindi word, is that correct? It comes out of India or Sanskrit?
No, Sanskrit and Pali are actually two different idioms, but they're somewhat related. Sanskrit is a more archaic form, and Pali is less archaic, but it's still archaic.
Okay, less archaic. Okay. You had mentioned your early studies as an anthropologist. How has that manifested in the work that you do now?
Well, let's just take an example of what we did here last weekend. It was a wonderful time when Roxanne Swenzel, who is a renowned Tewa Santa Clara potter.
I just came from her gallery.
Yeah.
As a matter
social
of fact.
activist.
Yeah.
So she's a very close friend of mine. And so she taught here. Her son, Porter Swenzel, also taught here. He teaches at AIA. And Troy Fernandez, who's one of my students, who is of Hispanic, Sephardic, Tewa culture. And he taught here, and we did a fantastic retreat called Ancient Lands, where we went into the history of the Tewa people with Roxanne and Porter teaching about the ancient cultures of this land, and then Troy talking about Hispanic culture, and then, of course, planting our garden here under the aegis of, I don't know if you know Wendy Johnson.
No, I don't.
Oh, she is just amazing. She's a master gardener. She wrote a fabulous book called Gardening at the Dragon's Gate, and she's a total visionary. She's here now, but you'll meet her tonight if you go to Natalie Goldberg's book signing. Another incredible woman, Wendy Johnson, and another one, Natalie Goldberg.
So the anthropologist aspect of that, you're still doing work
Oh, absolutely.
today.
I'm totally into cultural diversity and being a bridge into other cultures. Again, thinking about Angel's work in midwifery in Nepal, and how important it is that not only that we respect the great techniques of Western medicine, which Angel is able to bring into that culture, for example, but also that Nepali people have their own medical tradition. One of those people always travels with us, Amchi Lundup. So we're always working in that bridge, that interface between cultures, and to be respectful and curious and inclusive.
What does your typical day look like?
Well, my typical day, it's usually I'm up at 4. I sit for at least 45 minutes, if I can.
In meditation.
In meditation. And then I often have a little bath, and then I'll come and I'll work until just a little before 7. Then I come down to Upaya Zen Center Zendo, and I sit with the community for an hour. I have breakfast, and then nothing is typical after that. Today, I, wanted to go to the DMV, but they require so much documentation.
What were they asking of you?
I'm a little bit off the grid financially. I'm a monk, so I actually don't handle money. They wanted bank accounts, tax things. I mean, just to get my driver's license renewed. I had my passport. I had my old license, but was it just to prove the bank statements to prove your residency?
That I have,
for residency. But I mean, I had to laugh. I thought, oh my gosh, that's right. I kind of live off the grid, so to speak, and, it's fine.
Did you end up getting your license?
No, not. I hope to get it tomorrow.
Oh, my goodness. That's crazy. Do you have a car here?
Do I have a car?
Yeah, do you have a car?
I don't own a car,
okay.
But somebody in the Zen Center will drive me.
You can use it.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, my goodness. The reason I ask about your typical day is because you're really knowledgeable about what's going on in the world. Not that you shouldn't be. But you're looking at big picture, you're keeping in touch with the news, something that I have a really difficult time with because I find it so, I don't want to say depressing because I'm not a depressive person, but it's difficult for me to stay up on what's happening because I'm so disappointed in everything that's going on. but you really are keeping in touch and you're doing a lot of deep thinking about it, aren't you?
I mean, I think it's okay if one is very sensitive to take the news in doses that are not going to overwhelm you. I remember I studied with a wonderful Tibetan Lama, Chagdu Tulku Rinpoche, and he used to watch the news. And I said, Rinpoche, why are you doing that? He said, because it's a place I can practice compassion. And I look at that whether, it happens to be a politician that I think whom I think is causing a lot of harm, or it's an institution that's causing harm, or an individual who's causing harm, like someone, a road rage incident where, a man punches a woman and breaks her arm and jaw. And I feel compassion for the woman, but I also feel compassion for the man, because being an angry, ugly person is suffering too. No way does that condone his act, but it's more that to understand that kind of hatred is causing many other suffering, but it's also a state of mind that is ugly to experience. So it's really, for me, it's a practice.
And you have years and years of practice. For those of us who don't have as many years, and I'm maybe 10 years into meditation myself, on and off, but a pretty good practice these last few years. But for those who either aren't meditators or just getting into it, and I'm not looking for a hack, I'm not looking for a shortcut, but how do we wake up in the morning and put our feet on the ground and have compassion and not feel overwhelmed and disappointed and depressed about everything?
Well, there's some people who are naturally that way.
Depressed. And
no,
or happy.
They're naturally balanced.
Okay.
But that's a small group of people. That's why I began to engage in meditation practice. I wanted to cultivate mental balance.
For yourself, or do you mean for others?
No,
teaching others?
No, I'm talking about myself.
Okay.
I was so upregulated in the 60s. Everything was wrong. The government, this, that, and the other. I was just an absolute, in a state of moral outrage. And that's a very unpleasant state to be in. And as a result of that, I realized that I was less effective. I was more reactive, and I was experiencing so much stress myself that I began to actually use meditation, not to avoid those feelings, but to actually create the conditions where I could observe the feelings, explore their origin, begin to ground, and also to understand more deeply that every politician that I think is harming others, that also is suffering, which is, again, not to say that it gives a politician permission, but it's more to understand that this person is really ignorant. Greed, hatred, and delusion, is deluded, is greedy, is unkind, and that it's really important to cultivate these pro-social states of mind in order to not be struck down by current events. We need every good person out there today taking a stance of integrity, calling, for example, our politicians, our educators, our medical people in the correction system, even humanitarians, calling for integrity in all aspects of the life of service. Politicians are public servants. So what does it mean to be a public servant? It means to serve the people. But, it's not just the people. It means also to serve the earth. Anyway, you can hear I get into a rave about these things.
Well, I know, but I love it. And I'm both overwhelmed and also simplified by what you're saying, because you're listing these things that we can do, and you're not saying should, but these things that we can do. And I think, you're right. I should be paying a little bit more attention. I know that's not what you're saying to me, but I feel in myself, Beth, you could pay a little bit more attention. You could be a little bit more involved and be grounded at the same time. And it is possible to do that. But at the same time, I just think, Roshi, where do I even start? Because there are so many places.
Yeah, but you can start right where your feet are. If you're a mother, you can start with your kid. If you're a spouse, you start with your spouse. If you're somebody working in, like you are, a podcast, but you don't do this all by yourself. You have collaborators. You just do as much as is appropriate for you. And you find the scale of your effectiveness where you're not going to be destroyed by your endeavors.
Well, you're giving me wonderful permission to give myself a break too and not feel like I have to do everything. So I appreciate that.
I mean, for me, every exhale is a kind of a break. But I meditate every day. I'm on the cushion 3 to 4 hours a day. And that's my medicine. For somebody else, a good run might be their medicine. But in my meditation practice, I'm training my nervous system. And I'm also cultivating a lot of compassion in the process.
Can you define a word for me? You said earlier that in the 60s, you found yourself upregulated.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Stressed out, overreactive. My nervous system was incredibly hyper.
And you recognize that about yourself. And
Well, I wasn't happy. I mean, one doesn't want to be reactive and overexcited about everything. It's more, and also there were people who were good and there were people who were bad. Everybody, I lived in a black and white, right and wrong world.
And we do today too. And the vast majority of us are all upregulated. We're over-caffeinated. We're looking at Facebook. We're standing in line at the post office, looking at our social media accounts to see who has liked us. I was born in the 60s, but not aware of what was going on there.
Yeah.
It seems far worse now.
Oh, I think so.
It really does.
Well, our attention's been colonized basically by the corporate world and political interests through our social media. And, we've allocated our attention to these wonderful digital devices without which I cannot imagine living, except 1 month a year I get to be dissociated from my social media.
And otherwise you don't want to live without it because it serves a value also.
It connects me with people all over the world. I know, again, going back to Angel, I am sure she's in connection with all of these wonderful Nepalis not all, but a lot of them who are our collaborators. And, it's a profound enrichment at the level of community connection. But the other thing, it's also an impoverishment because to having a face-to-face conversation with your kids who are sitting at the table, with their iPhones in their faces and not really connected at the psychosocial level with you as a parent or you as a older sibling. So
there was another term that you used. You said pro-social.
Pro-social, the opposite of pro-social is antisocial. So pro-social qualities would be like kindness, compassion, gratefulness, gratitude, joy, all of the sort of range of qualities, mental qualities associated with positive psychology. So, all the well-being qualities. Yeah. So we can actually, as Sharon has made the point, she made it to me years ago, that we can intentionally cultivate pro-social states of mind. And mostly what we're doing is, we're just kind of have this self-talk, which is kind of unhealthy, and dissing people and kind of dividing the community and finding everything wrong. Yeah, it's important to be able to discern and to be clear about things. But, even the things that you think you're really clear about, maybe next year you'll realize, oh, that wasn't true at all. So wisdom is interconnected with compassion. Compassion is this deep impulse, the deep feeling that our capacity to recognize suffering and also our aspiration to transform it. Wisdom is that compassion, is that capacity to be able to discern clearly the nature of reality as it is now.
In your lifetime, whether that's 120-year-old Roshi or 100-year-old Roshi, what do you hope to see in the coming years from our culture here in the United States, in the world? We're a world now. We're not just limited to the U.S., but what do you hope to see down the road?
That's a fascinating question because it's, I've worked a lot with dying people. And so, on one level, I always hope for a good death. But on another level, I know that I shouldn't be attached to any outcome, that what I have to do is the best I can to serve selflessly, unselfishly. It's not about me. How can I do the best I can in any given situation without being attached to outcome? Because if we're driving for an outcome and we don't get what we want, we end up experiencing a lot of futility. So I think from Dostoevsky to Václav Havel to Barbara Kingsolver have always talked about the difference between a hopeful person and an optimist. If you're an optimist, you aren't even motivated to do anything. But if you're a hopeful person, you'll do the best you can.
Interesting. I haven't heard the difference between that. So hopeful.
Yeah, hopeful is good. And, for me as a Buddhist, there's a kind of text that says, nemesis are hope and fear. But actually, I think that translation is inappropriate. I think it's important for us to have this kind of wise hope. I mean, I've worked with dying people for 50 years, so, everybody's going to die. So why bother?
Shocker.
Right.
Oh, darn,
Actually, it's a privilege. It's a privilege. And I'm sure Angel feels the same way. There she is helping women to have babies. And you never know. Maybe that baby will grow up to be a good person or a person who's very troubled, but still you're going to give your best.
When was it you first started working with the dying?
So that work began in 1970, and I was kind of a pioneer in this end-of-life care field. And I was a medical anthropologist at the University of Miami School of Medicine. And I saw that the most marginalized people in that healthcare system, in fact, were people who were dying. And I just became very moved. I consulted in the burn unit, and that was a very tough unit to work in. But I worked there, some of what I did at the medical school. And it just, often burn patients don't survive. And certainly 50 years ago, it was more challenging. 45 years ago, it was more challenging. And so, I learned a lot about mortality, one's mortality in that context. And it became a kind of, I felt privileged. I was so honored to be in this kind of intimate relationship with people who were highly vulnerable. But then I realized, wow, there's a lot of different kinds of vulnerable people, including the ones who look most privileged. And so, I began to see things in a somewhat different way.
Meaning we're all
vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's just not a special group.
And some people are just more aware of it than others.
Well, this is the point, actually, to be aware.
That's
Thank
beautiful.
You.
I have two quick things here.
Okay.
How can people support you?
Oh.
They could attend teachings here at the Upaya Zen Center.
Yeah,
is that
Upaya
right?
Zen Center is one of the most extraordinary environments. Robust, alive, inclusive. It's very easy to access, though our programs fill up very quickly. So, early registration is advised. It's Upaya, Upaya. And also, I think my book is a manual of great service, and I think it's a really good book.
I'll link to it in the show notes, and just give us the title of it again, the full title.
It's called Standing at the Edge, Finding Freedom Where Fear and Courage Meet.
Great. I can't wait to read it. Hopefully you have a copy here because I want to pick up.
I hope so.
Okay, good. And then again, this is the Be Bold podcast. As a Zen Buddhist and teacher, you probably don't look at yourself as being bold. Do you? Do you think you're bold? I think you're bold.
Oh.
I think as you said, you're a pioneer. Do you think you're bold?
I don't think it's necessary to put myself in a category. I'm just having a lot of gratitude because of the life I found myself in.
Said like a good Buddhist. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ben.
I can't tell you just how much I appreciate your time. That was a very special conversation for me. I really feel quite honored to have been in Roshi's presence for what I felt like was almost like a private teaching, and to have questions answered that I was interested in, and to get to hear personally about her new book, her years of work, and her very wise take on how we can take care of ourselves while also taking care of others. As always, a reminder that if you'd like to connect with me, you can friend me on Facebook, and I am Wandergal on Instagram. You can find out more about me by visiting wanderlustandlipstick.com. You can sign up for my newsletter on the Wanderlust and Lipstick site, and you'll receive a series of tips for making your travels safer. You can find out about the tours I lead at wandertours.com, and we've currently got space on North and South India tours, as well as Mount Kilimanjaro and a Tanzania safari, and there's some space on our Papua New Guinea trip in 2019. Ladies, you can join us on our Be Bold Facebook group. We've got nearly 2,600 members in that group, and it's a community of amazing women who are sharing their wins, sometimes their struggles, and we're learning from each other. That's the bottom line, and we're sharing some great information and encouragement. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Be Bold podcast. Until next time, be bold.